Several Chinese-Canadian groups who've warned the Canadian government of foreign election interference say race should not be an issue when it comes to investigating political interference. Some political experts have said China is using race to forward its agenda. One of those experts is my next guest, Christian Leuprecht. He's a professor of political science at the Royal Military College and Queen's University, and he joins us now from Munich, Germany. So good to see you, Christian. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon, Hillary.
So we did hear from you in a recent opinion piece describing some of your concerns about this. So I'm hoping that you can sort of take us through some of that now. Why do you think racism is a narrative being used by the Chinese government here?
So the Chinese Communist Party, not just in Canada but elsewhere, is instrumentalizing racism on the one hand as a way to polarize Canadian society, for instance, by trying to equate any type of criticism of the Chinese regime with a criticism of Chinese Canadians more broadly, and equating Chinese Canadians with the Chinese regime, which of course is a false equivalency. And it is also using racism in order to thwart any type of action against foreign interference, or more specifically against subversion by the Chinese regime, and thereby trying to continue to provide conditions that are propitious to its ability to manipulate our democracy, our economy, and our society.
Are there any specific examples that you have seen so far in use that you can share with us?
Well, I think we can. There's a host of specific examples on university campuses, for instance, of Tibetan, Uyghur, Hong Kong democracy activist groups being actively shut down and interfered with by pro-China individuals. We've also seen this in Vancouver on other occasions, for instance, where protests are actively being interfered with. These are legal protests. I think, and if you talk to members of the Hong Kong, Uyghur, Tibetan, or broader Chinese communities, many of them will have experienced firsthand interference, intimidation, and coercion by Chinese state sympathetic elements, or efforts to try to manipulate elements within their communities, their families back home, and so forth. And so what we have here is a hostile foreign state actor, on the one hand, actively instrumentalizing communities here for its political purpose, and on the other hand, a state actor that is doing so to advance interests that run fundamentally counter to the democratic values in Canada, including those of freedom of expression.
Now, there are a group of Canadian academics who've written an open letter to the former Governor General, David Johnston, who is, of course, now the special rapporteur who's looking into all of this. In this open letter, they say that they are concerned that Chinese Canadians might be targeted here, that this could create more problems. I spoke with one of those academics who signed this letter just a little bit earlier this morning, Timothy Stanley. I want to start by playing a little bit of what he told us.
We're very much concerned that in the current atmosphere that's very polarized, it can very easily lead, measures intended to address issues of security can very easily target entire communities. And we've seen this historically in the past, most recently in the Meher case, for example, which has negative effects on people.
Hoping for your reaction to that, what would you say to some of those concerns?
Well, I would say that having an objective and transparent assessment of the activities that are actually transpiring is precisely the way to avoid having entire communities being stereotyped for particular types of activities. It is precisely the way to demonstrate that the Communist Party of China's claim that it is the motherland to the Chinese Canadian community is simply a false claim, because the bulk of Chinese Canadians identify as Canadians, and many of them have lived here for up to 5 generations or longer. And so having the abilities to actually investigate these activities is precisely the way to demonstrate that these communities are fundamentally loyal to Canada and are in effect being instrumentalized for political purposes, rather than efforts to try to by people who are looking to apologize for the Chinese regime and its activities to thwart the Canadian state from defending the democratic rights of those individuals and those communities and protecting them from being coerced by foreign actors.
Do you think a public inquiry is what's going to be needed here?
Well, I think there's certainly two opportunities for a public inquiry, but these are two different tracks. One is a public inquiry specifically into subversion, because I think the talking about foreign interference to some extent is a detraction from the very specific problem of subversion in our democratic institutions, our economy, our society, and our educational institutions. At the same time, there's also an opportunity for public inquiry more broadly into foreign interference, because that would give us an opportunity to gauge and to hear precisely from those communities that are actively being interfered with. And of course, it's important that any such effort be geo-agnostic with regards to any one particular actor, so that we can make sure that we have a robust state and a state in which Canadians of all communities can have faith that this state will protect them from influence, interference, coercion by state actors, let alone from being instrumentalized for subversive purposes by hostile state actors.
Christian, thank you for this. As always, we really do appreciate your time. Christian Leuprecht joining us from Munich, Germany this morning. Of course, he's a professor at the Royal Military College and Queen's University. Thank you.
My pleasure.